there is a question that arrives in the middle of the night. Not an intellectual question, not the kind you debate in philosophy class or discuss over coffee with someone who enjoys a good argument. This is the kind that comes when the lights are off and the silence is too loud and something has happened or is happening that your mind cannot organize into any framework that makes sense. Why? Why did this happen? Why to me? Why to someone I love? Why does the world contain this level of pain? Why does a reality that supposedly has a divine intelligence at its center permit the suffering that I have witnessed, that I have lived through, that I carry in my body like sediment from a flood that never fully receded? If God is real, if there is something behind all of this that is not indifferent, then why does it look so often, so completely like indifference? This is not a new question. It is the oldest question. It has been asked in every language, in every century, by every person who has loved someone and watched them suffer, by every person who has done their best and seen it dissolve into outcomes that bear no resemblance to what was deserved. And what makes it so painful is not just the suffering itself. It is the silence that so often follows the question, the sense that the universe has received the question and returned nothing, that the asking itself disappears into a void that does not even have the courtesy to echo back. Today, I want to bring this question to a conversation that is more than 5,000 years old. A conversation that does not flinch from the pain, does not offer false comfort, and does not resolve the question with the kind of easy answers that insult the reality of what human beings actually experience. I want to bring it to Krishna, on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, in the middle of the most agonizing moment of Arjuna's life. And I want to tell you what he says. Not as doctrine, not as theology, but as something that, if you truly hear it, has the power to change the way pain moves through you. Stay with me. Let us begin with what most spiritual frameworks do with the problem of pain. Because understanding the conventional answers and why they ultimately fail is necessary before we can appreciate what Krishna is actually offering. The most common answer is what philosophers call theodicy, the attempt to justify the existence of suffering in a world created or governed by a good and powerful divine being. Suffering exists to test you. Suffering exists to teach you. Suffering is the result of your own choices or the choices of those around you. Suffering is temporary and will be compensated in another life, another realm, another mode of existence beyond this one. There is truth woven through all of these answers, but there is also a quality in them that anyone who has been through genuine pain will recognize immediately. The quality of a framework being applied from the outside, of someone who is not in the middle of the fire explaining helpfully and from a safe distance why the fire is good for you. When you are in genuine suffering, when the loss is real, when the grief is physical, when the question is not abstract but personal and urgent, these answers do not comfort, they explain. And explanation, in the middle of pain, often feels like a form of dismissal, like being handed a map when what you needed was a hand. Krishna does not do this. What makes the Bhagavad Gita so extraordinary and what makes it so relevant to the experience of suffering specifically is that it does not begin from a place of comfort. It begins from a place of collapse. Arjuna is not suffering from a philosophical puzzle. He is suffering in his body, his hands shaking, his breath short, his mind in pieces. And everything Krishna says comes from within that reality, not from above it. He does not explain the pain away. He goes into it. He takes Arjuna into depths of understanding that do not make the pain disappear, but fundamentally alter the person who is experiencing it. And that is a completely different kind of answer. The first thing Krishna says that matters for this question is something so counterintuitive that it requires sitting with carefully. He tells Arjuna, the soul is never born and the soul never dies. Weapons cannot cut it. Fire cannot burn it. Water cannot wet it. Wind cannot dry it. Now, stated boldly like this, it can sound like a dismissal of pain, like saying, the things you are grieving over are not real, so stop grieving. But that is a fundamental misreading. Krishna is not denying the reality of loss. He is not saying that death is nothing, that grief is inappropriate, that the pain of watching someone suffer is not real. He is pointing to something else entirely. He is pointing to a dimension of existence that is not touched by what is happening at the surface. A depth in the structure of what we are that no external event, no matter how devastating, can reach or diminish or destroy. The body changes, the circumstances change. The people and situations and relationships that constitute the surface of a life are in constant flux, constantly arising and passing, constantly subject to the forces of time and nature and the irreducible uncertainty of being alive in a material world. But something else, something he calls the Atman, the soul, does not change, cannot be changed, has the same quality of indestructible presence whether the surface of life is smooth or devastated. This is not meant to be consoling in a cheap sense. It is not saying that the loss does not matter because something deeper is intact. It is saying something more radical, that the very core of what you are and the very core of what the people you love are exists at a level that no pain, no loss, no catastrophe, no death can reach. And this changes the nature of the question, not by answering it in the conventional sense, but by widening the frame within which the question is being asked. But what about God? Where is the divine in all of this? Because the question of pain is not only a question about the soul, it is a question about the nature of the reality in which the soul finds itself, about whether that reality is, at its core, governed by something that deserves the word divine, something that is not only powerful but good, not only present but caring. Krishna's answer to this, and it is one of the most astonishing passages in the entire Gita, comes in the 11th chapter in what is called the Vishvarupa, the universal form. Arjuna asks to see Krishna as he truly is, not as the friend, not as the teacher, not as the companion in the chariot, but as the ultimate reality, the divine as it actually is. And what he sees destroys him. Not physically, but the small, comfortable version of himself, the version that thought he understood the scale of what he was dealing with. He sees a form that contains everything, every being, every moment, every birth and death, every galaxy, every atom. He sees time itself not as a sequence of events, but as a single, simultaneous presence. He sees the entire universe arising and dissolving within a single awareness. He sees gods and sages and demons and ordinary human lives all existing within one inconceivably vast consciousness. And he sees at the center of it all something that is neither cruel nor kind in the way human beings use those words, something that is beyond the categories of comfort and threat, something that contains all polarities, creation and destruction, beauty and terror, intimacy and vastness, without being defined by any of them. He sees what reality actually is when the human mind's insistence on familiarity and scale is set aside, and he is terrified. He begs Krishna to return to the familiar form, the friend, the teacher, the human face, because the truth of what reality is, encountered directly, is more than the ordinary self can hold for long. But here is what this vision reveals about the question of pain. It reveals that pain is not evidence of divine indifference. It is evidence of divine scale. A reality so vast, so multidimensional, so beyond the comprehension of any single perspective, that evaluating it as good or bad from the position of one human life in one moment of history is like a single wave evaluating the ocean as cruel because it was broken on a shore. The breaking was real. The pain of the breaking was real. But the ocean is not cruel. It is simply the ocean. But this raises an immediate objection, and it is a serious one. If the divine is simply so vast that it transcends our categories of good and bad, of caring and indifferent, then what are we left with? an impersonal cosmic process that produced us, uses us, and discards us without the slightest awareness of our individual existence? A reality so enormous that the suffering of a single human being, the loss of a child, the death of a love, the long, slow dissolution of a life that deserved better registers as nothing? Is that the comfort? That we are so small, we do not matter? No. And here is where Krishna's teaching becomes something that I believe is genuinely unprecedented in the spiritual literature of the world. Because immediately after showing Arjuna the cosmic form, immediately after revealing the scale and the vastness and the terrifying completeness of what the divine actually is, he returns to the intimate. He says, "And I am in the hearts of all creatures. I am the same self that is in you. I am closer to you than you are to yourself." The same reality that is the totality of the cosmos is also the innermost presence in the individual soul. The God who contains everything is also the companion in the chariot. Not despite the vastness, because of it. Because a reality that is truly infinite cannot be only big, it must also be small. Cannot be only transcendent, must also be intimate. Cannot be only the ocean, must also be every single wave. This is the answer Krishna gives to the question of whether the divine cares about individual pain. Not, "It will be compensated later." Not, "It is part of a plan you cannot see." But, "I am in you, closer than your breath, more intimate than your own awareness, not watching from outside what you are going through, experiencing it from within." The pain is real. The divine presence within the pain is also real. These are not contradictions. They are the same reality perceived from different depths. Let me speak to something that I think is rarely addressed directly enough in spiritual teachings about suffering. There is a kind of pain that asks not just why, but where. Not, "Why did this happen?" but, "Where is the divine in the middle of this?" Not as a philosophical question, but as a lived, urgent, desperate one. Where is the presence I was promised? Where is the comfort I was told would come? Where is the God who is supposed to be near in times of suffering, near enough to feel, near enough to hold, near enough to make the difference between endurance and collapse? And Krishna's answer, spoken through the entire architecture of the Gita, is here. I have always been here. I am here. Not in the way you were looking for, not necessarily in the form of the pain being lifted or the questions being answered or the circumstances being rearranged into something bearable, but present, in the part of you that has not collapsed, in the awareness that is still here, still receiving experience, still witnessing what is happening, in the extraordinary fact that consciousness persists through everything, through grief, through loss, through the darkest experiences that human life can generate. That persistence is not accidental. That awareness, unchanged by what it contains, present through all of it, is the signature of the Atman, is the place where the divine and the human meet so completely that the distinction dissolves. And if that feels too abstract to be genuinely comforting, I understand. I am not trying to offer abstractions in place of real presence. What I'm trying to say is this: the part of you that is still here, still asking, still reaching towards something, that part is not separate from what you are reaching toward. The longing and the source of the longing are the same thing. The wound and the healing are made of the same substance. This is not a resolution, but it is a truth. And sometimes a truth, held honestly, is more sustaining than comfort that arrives too quickly. Krishna makes a statement in the Gita that is perhaps the most direct thing any spiritual teacher has ever said about the relationship between God and the suffering of individual human beings. He says, "Those who worship me with devotion, they are in me, and I am also in them." And then he says, "I carry what they lack and preserve what they have." I carry what they lack. Let that land for a moment. Not, I observe what they lack with compassion. Not, I am aware of their deficiency and wish them well. Not, I am available to help if they ask in exactly the right way. I carry it. The word in Sanskrit vahami means to bear, to hold, to take on. It is the word used for a burden that is physically picked up and transported. This is Krishna saying the weight that is too heavy for you to carry alone, I am carrying it with you. Not for you, in the sense of removing it entirely, because the carrying is part of what this life is, but with you. From inside the experience, from the most intimate possible proximity to what you are going through. This is not an impersonal cosmic force. This is not an indifferent universe that generates suffering as a byproduct of its own indifference. This is a divine presence that, by its own declaration, takes on the weight of what its people cannot bear alone. And the one condition, if you can even call it a condition, given how accessible it is the turn toward it, the direction of devotion, not the achievement of worthiness, not the successful completion of a spiritual curriculum, just the honest, imperfect, often desperate turning of the heart in the direction of the divine. That turn, made in any condition, in any state, from any depth of suffering or confusion or failure, is met. Not always in the way we expect, not always with the experience we were hoping for, but met, held, carried. This is what Krishna says. I want to take a moment to speak to the person who has tried to believe this and could not, who has turned toward the divine in their suffering and felt nothing come back, who has prayed in desperation and heard only their own voice echoing in a room that felt completely empty. I do not want to offer you another explanation for why that happened. I do not want to tell you that the silence meant something you did not understand, or that your faith was not quite right, or that the answer was there if you had known how to see it. What I want to offer you is this. Krishna also speaks of those who are separated from the divine by what he calls the veil of Maya, the fundamental opacity of ordinary consciousness that makes the deepest reality difficult or impossible to perceive directly. And he is explicit that this opacity is not a moral failure, it is not a punishment, it is the condition of being embodied, of having a mind that is oriented outward by its very nature, of living in a world designed to capture attention at the surface and hold it there. The silence you heard was not divine absence. It was the sound of a consciousness that had not yet found the layer of itself beneath the noise. Not because it was incapable, because it had not yet been shown where to look. And this is in part what the Gita is for. Not to explain pain, but to reorient the one who is in it. To turn the attention gently, persistently, without self-condemnation from the surface, where the pain is loudest, to the depth where the presence is most real. Not away from the pain, through it, into what exists at the center of even the most devastating experience. Because even in pain, especially in pain, something is present, some quality of awareness, some residue of consciousness, some thread of existence that has not been broken by what is happening to the surface. That thread is the Atman. That thread is where the divine lives in you, and it has not gone anywhere, not through any of it. Let us come back to the question of God and what Krishna actually reveals about the divine nature. Because one of the most striking things about the Gita, when you read it carefully, is how consistently Krishna resists the version of God that human beings most commonly construct. The God who is primarily powerful and primarily judgmental. The God who rewards the compliant and punishes the failing. The God who is essentially a larger, more permanent version of the most demanding authority figure in your life. Krishna's self-revelation is entirely different in character. He describes himself as the taste in water, the light in the sun and the moon, the life in all living things, the intelligence in the intelligent, the courage in the courageous, the love in those who love. He says, I am the sacred syllable, the silence in mysteries, the wisdom of the wise. This is not the description of an authority figure. It is the description of an intimacy so complete that there is nowhere the divine is not, no experience that is not, at its deepest level, an expression of the divine nature. No pain that exists outside of it. No grief that is not held within the same consciousness that also contains every joy and every beauty and every moment of genuine human goodness. And this means something specific for how we relate to suffering. It means that pain is not evidence of divine absence. Pain is evidence that you are still alive, still conscious, still capable of caring about what happens to you and to the people you love. And aliveness, consciousness, the capacity for care, these are themselves expressions of the divine presence. They are what the divine looks like when it takes the form of a human life. Suffering is not outside God. Suffering is within the divine awareness, not because the divine is cruel or indifferent, but because everything that exists is within the divine awareness. And the same presence that holds the suffering also holds the healing. The same consciousness that contains the darkness also contains every experience of light that human beings have ever known. This does not make the pain less real. It does not make the question of why it exists any simpler. But it does change the fundamental aloneness of the experience. You are not suffering outside of God, reaching toward a divine being who is somewhere else. You are suffering within a divine awareness that holds the entirety of what you are, including your pain, including your question, including the very reaching of your heart towards something that feels absent. Nothing you experience is outside of what holds you. There is a moment in the Gita that I find more moving than almost any other. It comes in the 9th chapter, when Krishna is speaking about the nature of devotion and the relationship between the divine and those who love it. He says, "Even if a person of very bad conduct worships me with exclusive devotion, they are to be regarded as righteous, for they have rightly resolved. And then, quickly they become righteous and attain lasting peace. Know for certain, Arjuna, that my devotee is never lost." My devotee is never lost, not my perfect devotee. Not my devotee who has resolved all their questions and eliminated all their doubts and moved through suffering with consistent grace and never asked the question in a tone that bordered on accusation. My devotee, the one who turns toward me, even imperfectly, even angrily, even in the middle of demanding to know why. The person who is asking why, who is not letting the question go, who is refusing to simply accept the pat answers and the easy consolations, who is insisting that reality makes some kind of sense, who is reaching toward the divine even with a clenched fist. That person is a devotee. That reaching, in whatever form it takes, is a form of the love that connects the human to the divine. Because indifference does not ask why. Indifference does not care enough to grieve. Indifference does not break at the edge of the unbearable and demand that the universe explain itself. Only love does that. And the God that Krishna reveals in the Bhagavad Gita, the intimate, the vast, the one who carries what we cannot carry, the one who is in us as the soul itself, that God is not threatened by the question, is not offended by the anger, is not withdrawing in response to the doubt, is present in all of it, holding all of it, answering not with explanation but with presence, not with a solution to the pain but with the indestructible fact of being here inside the experience, as close as the awareness in which the experience is arising. I want to close by speaking to the soul directly, because I think that is ultimately what this teaching is about. Not to the mind, which wants explanations, not to the intellect, which wants systems and frameworks and satisfying resolutions to difficult questions, but to the soul, which knows something the mind does not, which carries beneath all the confusion and all the grief and all the unanswered questions, a memory of what it is and where it comes from. You are not an accident in an indifferent universe. You are not a consciousness that appeared briefly, suffered arbitrarily, and will dissolve back into nothing without having meant anything. You are, as Krishna tells Arjuna in some of the most tender language in the entire Gita, a fragment of the divine, the eternal self, clothed in form, moving through experience, in the process of the longest and most important remembering that any being can undertake. The pain you have known is real. The losses have been real. The questions have been real, and the silence that sometimes answered them has been real. And also real, the soul that has carried you through all of it. The awareness that has persisted through every devastation. The something in you that has not, at its deepest level, been broken, even when everything on the surface felt irreparably shattered. That something is the Atman, and the Atman, as Krishna teaches it, is not separate from God. It is the place where the divine and the human meet so completely that they are, at that depth, indistinguishable. You have never been outside of what holds you, not once. Not in the worst of it. And the question you carry, the why, the where, the how can this be, that question is itself a reaching of the soul toward its source, not evidence of separation. Evidence of the longing that has always pointed home. Let it point, follow it inward, through the grief, through the confusion, through the silence that has sometimes felt like absence. What you find there, at the center of all of it, is not an answer. It is a presence, quiet, vast, intimate, unbroken. It has been waiting for you to arrive. The waiting is not quite the right word. It was always already here. You are dear to it. You have always been. If something in this conversation touched the place in you where the real questions live, if it offered even a small thread of something true to hold on to, I want to ask you to carry it forward. Subscribe to this channel. Leave a like on this video. Not as a transaction, but as a way of making sure this teaching finds its way to the next person who is in the middle of the night, asking the oldest question, not yet knowing that the silence they are hearing is not the final answer. We are building something here that matters. A space where the hardest questions of the human heart are taken seriously, where pain is not explained away but brought into the light of something ancient and genuinely wise. You belong in that space. Until next time, hold the question tenderly, trust the reaching, and know that what you are reaching toward has never stopped reaching back.